Have you ever found yourself feeling a little puzzled by the challenge of connecting with your teen students? If so, you are not alone. You know, I don't have to tell you this, but I will anyway. Teens today are juggling so much more than scales and practice routines. They're balancing heavy academic pressures, social dynamics, and tons of digital distractions. Shout out to the people who grew up without the cell phones. So glad that I was one of those. Now, let's talk about connecting with teens. It's important. We want to keep them interested in music lessons, and sometimes it feels like it can require a lot of work. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Today, we are going to get into effective strategies to keep your teen students engaged in the studio. And we're not talking about just keeping their attention with pop music or this and that. We are talking about creating a studio environment where they feel valued and understood and encouraged and excited to grow. So we're going to get started in just one moment. But before we do that, let's play a little intro music while we make sure we're going live in all the places. While I do that, let me know where you're tuning in from today. All right, just in the nick of time. All right, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Years ago, when I was part of Upbeat Piano Teachers, we released a Teaching Teens 101 webinar, and it was one of my favorite things to put together. And just recently, a colleague of mine, Wendy Stevens, released a really fantastic webinar about teens. And when I saw her posts come up about it on Instagram, I got really excited because I'm very passionate about teaching teens. And I'm going to explain a little bit of, the backstory behind that today. What we're going to do is we are going to be digging into effective strategies to not only engage but retain your those teen students in your studio. And spoiler alert, we're not talking about pop music today. We're going to dig a little bit deeper. And I'm going to be talking about Wendy Stevens's webinar that she released last month. I feel very lucky and privileged to have been gifted this webinar, and I get to present this to you as a little promotion. So we're going to get into that as well, but stick around for all the tips that we're going to be dropping. The topic of the day, there we go. All right, so I see we have a few people tuning in. We'll say hello, and then we'll get straight to the goods. Laura's waving. She's up in Canada. We have Susan Edward Stevenson tuning in from Toledo, Ohio. You're not that far from me, Susan. And I see that Celestine is over on Instagram. Nice to see you over there as well. So let's dive in, shall we? I've got lots of things to share with you today. And of course, the Savvy Sara bot is set up and ready to roll. So if you are on Instagram or if you are on Facebook, you can drop the word teen down below and she'll send you the notes from today. If you are joining us on YouTube, if you look in the description of this video or in the pinned live chat, you will find a link that you can click as well. So go ahead and check those out. And I'd love to know, before we get into unpacking this issue and why we're talking about this today, I'd love to know from those who are tuning in, whether you're live or you're on the replay, do you have a lot of teens in your studio? Let us know. How many teens do you have in your studio this year? And also, have you ever struggled with connecting with your teens? I know I can raise my hand to that, and I'm going to share some stories about that today that I hope will be useful to you because, I said it earlier, I'm really passionate about teaching teens. We're going to get into the why. So I see Susan has dropped the word down below, and so has Heather. Fantastic. Hi, Heather. Nice to see you here. All right. So McGuffin Piano Studio is over on Instagram. If sometimes, just to let you know, the Savvy Sara bot gets like glitchy, so I will make sure that I reach out to you personally and get all that stuff to you. Okay. Hey, Sings Things is also on Instagram. Elizabeth says, greetings from Central New York, teen teacher here, and a couple of rising teens. I'm so glad that you, mentioned that, Elizabeth, because, it's reminding me, the advice that we are looking at today is not just about the teens that you're teaching. Hey, parents of teens, you can use all the stuff that we're talking about today with your own children. And Deb says, 1/3 of my studio is teens. I love it. Okay, great. So let's unpack the issue. I just wanted to share like a little background story as to why I'm really passionate about this. And then we're going to get into the strategies today. So little story about myself. I moved around a lot as a kid. No, I wasn't in a military family. That's the first thing that everybody asks. My dad worked for a corporation that owned city clubs and athletic clubs, and he was really good at it. So they would move him around to be the general manager at different places. And so one of the moves that happened was when I was in 8th grade. That's a tough time. So I moved from a school that was really big, where I felt like I had finally figured out who I was and the people that I wanted to be with, to a school that was very rural, very small, very tight knit. And it was a really tough transition for me. And I also had to change piano teachers at the time. And I struggled. And looking back, Looking back now, I know more about why I was struggling. And when I was a teen, I thought it was just because, my teacher's she's not showing any interest in the kind of music that I want to play. Teenage Sara just wanted to play Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis. I mean, let's just be honest. But it wasn't just about the music. It was about the fact that I didn't feel a connection. I didn't feel as though I could really be myself there. And so this is what we're going to be digging into. We're going to look at strategies. We're going to examine team dynamics. We're going to look at strategies that you can use in your studio to help your teens. And I'm going to talk about Wendy Stevens's webinar, which I think everyone should get because it's freaking fantastic, y'all. So I'm going to give you details about that in a second. Okay. I see Laura says, oh, this is really good. So let me take this little guy down. Laura says, I have a few teens in my studio. Certainly would love to have ideas as how to retain them once they hit that 13, 14 years old, right? Literally, I was at that 14-year-old stage when I quit piano lessons. I came back to it later. But I quit for 2 years because I had a hard time. Karen says, I love my teens. Yeah, so let's get to it. We're going to start with understanding teen dynamics. Okay, so I had fun kind of digging into this. So I want to give you some very brief and not at all official, I've read it, but I'm not a professional here, information about how the teenage mindset affects learning and communication. So one of the things that happens that when we're a teen is we go through this really rapid brain development. But the issue is that different areas of the brain don't all develop at the same time. So we've got this little like weird imbalance going on. So I'll try to explain part of the science because I found it fascinating. So one of the things that happens is that the prefrontal cortex doesn't mature, we believe, until about the age of 24. Now, this area of the brain is responsible for things like regulating mood, attention, impulse control, and the ability to think abstractly. It also helps us have the ability to plan ahead and to see potential consequences. So that part of the brain, when we are a teen, is really not quite developed yet, which, okay, no big deal. But here's the issue. The amygdala starts to develop a little bit earlier. So this area is activated when we sense potential threats, when we might feel strong emotions like anger or fear, and it can lead us into this like fight or flight behavior or aggression or kind of reflex-like responses. So if your teens have ever, seemed super moody to you, or if you've got this like fluctuation where you're never sure what's going to walk in that door that week, it's probably because we've got this imbalance between the amygdala being developed quicker when we're teens and the prefrontal cortex, which helps us stay calmer. It balances out the amygdala. It is not developed yet. So it's important to keep these things in mind when we're teaching our teens, because literally they're not in control of their brains. We all knew this. We've all been teenagers, right? We want to keep these things in mind so that we can keep our own emotions in check when we're working with them. Because I'm pretty sure most of y'all are over the age of 24. And our amygdala and our prefrontal cortex are balancing each other out a little bit better than our teens. I found this idea of checking our own emotions. Wendy talked a lot about this in her webinar, and I found it really fascinating. She had discussions with these therapists around one of the ways that we can support teens, and it was keeping our own emotions in check. And she gave very specific ways to do that, which I found really not only interesting, but super helpful. So that's one of the things that we want to keep in mind at the beginning, because they got these funny brain things going on. This is so interesting. Okay, so if that resonates with you, let me know down below. Let me know your takeaways. I see one from Karen. She said, I studied this a lot when I ran a teen adoption support group for teens and their parents. Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you did that. That's really, really important work. McGuffin Piano Studio says 2 teens now, but I would like to add a group of 4 beginning teens. Ooh, great. So I think this is going to be some good information for you here today. So let's get to the second point. Okay, so first, knowing that like we have to understand there's some interesting dynamics going on in the brain of our teenagers, then the question becomes, well, how do we build rapport with them when that can feel a little tricky when you don't know what's going to walk in the door that day? So I've got a few points that I'd like to go over. The first thing is this. It's all about building respect and trust, and not just respect and trust for that teen, but them building respect and trust for you, because we want this to be a mutual thing, right? And one of the things that we can do is to show and demonstrate trust in their capabilities and treat them as young adults. And I know that that can be almost like a, oh, surprise, when you've had this kid who's like 8 years old and all of a sudden 11 rolls around and things start to shift. And we as teachers then have to start shifting our approach in how we are speaking to these kids. And it's something else that I learned from Wendy's webinar. Like and I think we all kind of knew this, especially those of you who are parents. The teenage years are starting younger than 13. I wonder if we should start calling them 11 teens and 12 teens. Because those changes that we're seeing them are starting to happen earlier. So when a kid hits 11 years old, they are often going through those, brain transitions, physical transitions that we were going through later as kids. Karen says, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, the transitions are happening earlier. So in building the respect and trust, building this mutual way to communicate with one another, we start by showing trust in their capabilities and building trust there. And then how do we do that? So let's get more specific, right? We need to have open lines of communication, which can feel so tricky sometimes. Like I can think of some of my favorite students, like even though they've been with me a really long time, and sometimes when they walk in the door, it's like they are ready to go and they're so super happy, and I'm like, yay. Other times they're very quiet. And it's not because they don't like me. I have to keep my own emotions in check there, like to realize like, oh, like I actually didn't do anything wrong. It's fine. But what I need to do is be mindful of the communication. So thinking of gentle ways, but also not like hidden ways to encourage our students to express their thoughts, to express their concerns, to be able to talk about their interests. And this is the important part, without fear of judgment, because teens are looking for acceptance from us. And if we want to build rapport and trust with our students, having that open line of communication so that they can express those things to us without fear of judgment is really important. And one of the things, and I'm going to give you some like specific examples of this in a moment, but one of the things that really struck me when I watched Wendy's workshop, and I'm going to give you the information about this. I know, right? I'm going to give it to you. But when I watched it, she talked a lot about curiosity and empathy and how those two things were really important to bring into our teaching experiences, to stay curious, to stay empathetic. Because when we can lean into those two things, it's much easier to keep those lines of communication open. So let me tell you a little story, a personal story about this in my teaching career. So I had a student, we're going to call him Sam. And Sam had been with me for a long time. Thinking back, gosh, it's been so long since when he first started. I want to estimate that he was 7 or 8 years old when he started with me. And brilliant kid, just absolutely loved playing piano. And when he reached the age, I think it was 12, a switch flipped. And it happened really quick. And it was very unexpected for me. So here's what happened that day. That day when he came into lessons, out of the blue, he said, "Miss Sara, I'm not going to take lessons anymore." And I could tell he was feeling very emotional. And I was kind of shocked. I wasn't sure what to think. And I rolled with it. I said, "Okay, I understand. Well, let's take some time today to talk about what you've learned over the years, and set you up for success when you leave." And later that day, so we got through the end of the lesson. Later that day, I called his mom because I was shocked. I was shocked. I thought, things were going really well. What happened? And when I was able to communicate with his mom and ask some important questions, we got to the heart of the issue. And one of the reasons I didn't do that in lessons with Sam is because I could sense he was really worked up. And I didn't want to press that at the time. So what we discovered was that he was afraid to tell me. So I wish I had some of these tools that Wendy had, that Wendy's given us in the webinar. He was afraid to tell me that he didn't want to play in a recital, because playing in a recital made him feel very, very anxious and very nervous. And he was afraid that if he told me that he didn't want to play in the recital, that I was going to be judgmental and be disappointed. And so I was able to convince his mom I told her, I said, "Oh my gosh, he doesn't have to play in recitals. Like, that is not our goal here. Like, it is not the end all be all playing in a recital." So what I was able to express to him was, you are valued here, not because you play well in a recital, but because you are a really cool human being and you're a really good musician. And if you want to come in here and just play for the sake of playing and play for yourself, I am here for this. And wouldn't you know, he stayed until he graduated from high school. And shock of shocks, his senior year, he said to me, "I want to play in the recital." So there's my little story, right? It all ties back into being curious, tapping into empathy, because when we're able to do that, we're able to open up those lines of communications again so we can figure out what is happening in the brains of these students, right? So I'm going to pause a second and just remind everyone, if you're watching right now, if you drop the word teen down below, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, you can get a hold of the links that we're going to be talking about today. If you're on YouTube, look for a link in the description of this video or inside of the chat. So I would love to know, for those who are tuning in, do you have stories like that? Did you have a Sam in your studio? Or what are some of the other challenges? So 2 questions, like if you have stories like that you'd love to share, please, let's have a conversation about it. And the other thing here being, where are you struggling with your teens? What are your questions? Because I'd love to bring those up today. All right, so now let's get to some engagement techniques. Oh wait, no, I had one more thing. Before I get to this. Hey there, Kevin Staley's tuning in. So nice to see you. Good to see you. All right, so I had one more point about building rapport before I get ahead of myself. We want to really dig into how can we build stable relationships, right? So we've talked about open lines of communication. Now, how do we build stable relationships so that they're consistent? Well, we're going to lean into our own behavior, right? Not the teen's behavior, our own behavior, and build consistency in the way that we behave and the way that we tap into patience. Our whole goal is to build a supportive environment so that we can create these or foster these really strong relationships with our teen students, because it's important for them to have space where they can feel seen and heard and understood and valued. And some of the ways that we can do this, they're just so fascinating to me. It all has to do with the language that we choose. And it's not like, oh my gosh, you have to read this dissertation in order to understand how to relate to teens. No, it's not like that. It's these very tiny shifts in language that can make a very big difference. And one of the things that I loved about Wendy's webinar, we're going to talk about that right now, is the fact that she gave me a brilliant list of all of these prompts that I can use in lessons that were given to her by therapists. And as I was reading through the prompts, I was like, oh my goodness, I was kind of close to saying this, but just this little subtle language shift is so powerful. I've been using it in my studio over the past several weeks, and I just love it. So let's talk about this webinar, because I feel like I'm, teasing y'all with this. All right. So the webinar that I'm talking about is called Teaching Teens. Let me get this guy out of the way. Boop. It was right on top. Okay. It's called Teaching Teens: What Researchers, Therapists, and Teens Wish You Knew About Teaching Teenagers. And it's really, 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 really interesting. So in the workshop, some of the things that she covers, which I just think are fascinating, are things like what teens need the most, what we get wrong about teens, what they're thinking but they won't tell you, how to get them to open up, why the way, okay, and this point here is so fascinating to me, and teenage Sara would have really appreciated her teacher knowing these things. One of the things she talks about is why teen girls, why the way you treat them matters so much more than you can imagine, because there's extra special things going on with our teen girls. She also talks about how to keep from getting exasperated when you're teaching. And she talks about the reasons that teenagers quit. And it's, when I was listening to that portion of the webinar, that's when I realized, oh gosh, it really wasn't about the repertoire. I didn't quit at 14 because my teacher wouldn't let me play Phantom of the Opera. It was deeper than that. And she also talks about why we need to change the way that we talk to teens. Now, full disclosure, Wendy offered me, when I reached out to Wendy on Instagram and I saw her post about this webinar, she DM'd me and she said, hey, I've got an offer for you. Let's do a little collab here. So I got this webinar for free. And in exchange for that, I'm talking about this webinar. So this is a promotion, and I don't do a lot of promotions, you guys. I am super picky about what I will talk about because I only want to promote things that I really, truly believe in. Wendy Stevens, I have been a fan of hers as long as I can remember, and I love all of her resources. So if you want to learn more about this, and we're going to get to some further tips here, but I wanted to talk about this webinar because I kept mentioning it. If you want to get a hold of this webinar, one of the things that you can do, and I'll give you the link to this if you drop the word teen down below, you can get 15% off of it by using this code. If you drop the word teen down below, the Savvy Sara bot will send you this code, so you don't have to worry about getting that. I see there's a few more people who have dropped the word on Instagram, so I'm going to jot your name down just because sometimes the Savvy Sara bot can be super weird on Instagram, so I'll reach out to you privately. So Stolf Percussion says, it is so important to let them know we will stick with them no matter what. Oh, speaking to my heart. Challenges and even disappointments are temporary, but we are committed to staying by their side no matter how bumpy the ride. 100%. I love that you said that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a really, really powerful way to put it. And I see some other comments here. Elizabeth says her takeaway is that tiny language shifts are so powerful. Jeff Costello says, yep, tiny shifts in language. And I see Laura had something that she posted here as well. So we're going to get to that in a moment. Let me take these down. We'll come back to those in a moment. We're going to talk about engaging techniques that we can use to engage with teens, but let's bring up what Laura said here because I think it's important. She said, I find it challenging to balance the student's desire to play all pop all the time and the parents' desire for them to play Royal Conservatory of Music. Ah, yes. Anyone else feeling that? That can be a tricky thing here. So I'm glad that you shared that because that kind of like perfectly brings us into the next points that we're going to talk about. Thank you. Hey, Julia Lancion is joining us on Instagram. Sorry if I butchered your name there. Nice to see you. Okay, so let's get to the next point about engagement techniques here. Where's my button? Here we go. Oh, it looks all funky. Let's change that. Boop. All right, so engagement techniques. How can we make this happen? So this ties in with what you said, Laura. So one of the things that me personally, since I mean, teens are my favorite. Like if I could teach an entire studio of transfer teens, I'd be in heaven. It's just because that's my way of healing little 14-year-old Sarah's hurt. So first, we need to recognize their need for autonomy. And Laura, this might be something that you want to talk with your teens' parents about, right? So, at this age when they are feeling this strong need to be seen as autonomous adults, young adults, they have this growing need for independence. And so if either teachers, and I don't think any of the teachers here are doing this, because you're here, if teachers are pressuring students to play things that they don't want to play, we know that that's not going to go well. If parents are pressuring kids to play things they don't want to play, we know that that's not going to go well. So there might be room to have conversations with the parents to say, I recognize and respect that your teen has this need for autonomy and is growing independent. And so, in my opinion, this is what I would say. You can take what you find useful and leave the rest, right? What I would like to do is lean into that independence and allow your child to make decisions in lessons. I will offer the option to do RCM exams. However, I will not pressure them into doing that. And here is why, because I have evidence for this. I've had students do similar things. We don't do exams, but I've had students who really just lost interest in the style of music that they were playing before. Let's say it was classical. They lost interest in method books. They lost interest in doing classical pieces. Fine. So what we would do is we would go, great, what do you want to play? Right? And allow them to make the choices in their learning so that in turn will increase their engagement and their cooperation, which increases the chance that they are going to stick around. Now, what's fascinating is that every single time that I've done this, without fail, give it a year, maybe two, guess what they asked to start playing again? Classical music. It always happens. So the same thing may happen for your student, Laura. But, another thing that might be useful is to ask the teen, like, how do you feel about the RCM exams? And I think that a lot of the prompts that Wendy has in her sheets would be really helpful for you. Okay, so back to the engagement techniques. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So we talk about the need for autonomy. And this, knowing that they have this need for autonomy, what can we do to make this actionable? Well, we can help them create their own personalized learning goals. So one of the things that I like to do with all of my teens, especially since, oh my gosh, y'all, these teens are so busy now. Like, I know that I felt busy when I was a teenager, but it was nothing. I was a teenager in the mid-90s. Like, it was nothing compared to what they are involved in today. And especially since, like, they're all these, like, they grow up in this digital world. So they're constantly attached to their phones, and there's just a lot more societal pressure on them. I think it's really important to help them set their own individualized learning objectives. So when I'm working with a teenager, what I will do is ask lots of questions around, what's your capacity this week? What do you think, what would you like to achieve in this piece? Like, hey, when you come in here next Monday, what would you like to be able to do? And to get them to outline things. And sometimes what we realize in these conversations that we have is that in my mind, I had this kind of big goal for them, and what they really needed and really wanted was to cut that goal in half, which is fine. So, helping them to personalize and set individualized learning objectives for themselves is one of the things that's really helpful. All ties back to that, what's it called? I'm not going to remember. The prefrontal cortex, right? Since it's not completely developed, they're not really able to like figure that out for themselves. So it's something that we can help teach them, right? And the other thing that we can do is help make sure that the goals that they're setting and the goals that we're setting together really align with their personal music tastes and their aspirations. This is something that I return to at the beginning of every single session in the studio. So we essentially have 3 sessions. We have fall, spring, it's really winter, and then summer. And at the beginning of each one of those sessions, we have a sit down and we talk about, hey, what kind of music are you into right now? Like, let's look at like, how have you felt about the stuff that we've been working on the last couple of months? Like, there's no judgment. If you were like, you know what, actually, I kind of really didn't like this piece. Totally tell me, because I want you to enjoy what you're doing. And I will not care if you do not like a piece. So, really like letting them know, I'm not going to judge it. Let's make sure that these goals that we're setting now really align with where you want to go. I love this. Douglas Seth says, I had the same experience, classical rock and back to classical, right? Hey, Douglas, I just had my conversation with Daniel last week. So it's going to be on the podcast soon. It's going to be super cool. Anyway, just thought I'd tell you. Thanks for introducing us. All right. So let me share a little story about how setting these personalized goals and helping them, realize what they want to do works in my studio. So I'm going to give an example from my student Caroline. So Caroline, I love this kid. She's amazing. So she's 17 and she is all about playing classic rock, which I'm like, who are you? Where did you come from? Like, why are you so into this amazing music? So she's really into classic rock, and but she struggles in making decisions around what she wants to work on that day, or what piece she wants to pick next, because I believe there is this underlying fear of judgment that she's not going to pick the right thing and that I will think it's not cool. So we've had discussions around this in the past. One of our goals there is to really help, and I'm straight up about saying this to her. I said, if you learn one thing in music lessons, it is going to be that you are going to be able to confidently make choices without fearing judgment. And we talk about it all the time, and she's getting so much better at it. And whenever she makes a choice without like going like, oh, it doesn't matter to me, you pick, we like stop and we celebrate together, because she is like building this new form of confidence that's going to be really important for her later on in life. All right. So okay, so let's kind of wrap this up here. If there are any questions for the end of the broadcast here, or if you have any takeaways that you'd like me to bring up on the screen, now would be the time to do that. But I want to reiterate, we're going to do a little recap, and then I'm going to talk about Wendy's broadcast, and then we're going to do a little recap here. So if you are interested in learning more about teens, I highly recommend this workshop. It is just fantastic. It's not terribly long, so it's not something that's going to take a ton of your time. I love the fact that it literally comes with a fill in the blank worksheet, which makes me so happy in my brain, so that you can have that worksheet with you as you listen along and fill in the blanks. And it just really It's a really powerful workshop, and I think it's super cool because it's so different than what I've seen in the past. It's not Wendy interviewing other teachers to give you ideas around how to engage with teens. She interviewed therapists. She talked to therapists who specialize in working with teens, and she really digs deep into all of these things that are going on in these teenagers' heads. So if you do want to learn how to engage better with your teens and to increase that teen retention in your studio, it is a no-brainer to get this webinar. You can get 15% off of it now through the end of March if you use this code. If you want to get the link to this, just drop the word teen down below. We'll reach out to you and we'll get it to you. And I think with the 15% off, the webinar comes to like $38. So it's a no-brainer. Get it. My favorite part is the list of phrases that you can use and these tiny language shifts that you can use. She explains how to shift from, what was the, I didn't write it down in my notes here, but she explains how to shift. I'm going to bring it up because I have a note on it. It was so powerful. There it is. She explains how to shift validating the person in front of you rather than the action that they are doing. So like validating the who instead of the do. And I thought it was so amazing. And I've been testing it out with all of my students. And I just think it's a really powerful tool to have. So if you want to get a hold of this webinar, please do. All right, let's do our recap here. And we'll bring all of this goodness together. Let's do it. And again, thank you, Wendy, for this opportunity. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Debbie says, I have learned lots of new music by giving teens options to choose, right? I'm actually really obsessed with some of the songs that they've selected in my studio. I've learned some super cool pieces. A lot of earworms, I will say that. Some of those pieces get stuck in my brain. All right, so let's do a rapid recap for this. Here we go. And if you have anything you'd like to say in the chat, questions, now's the time. All right, here we go. Have you ever found yourself puzzled by the unique challenge of connecting with teenage students? Well, you're in the right place. So let's go over a few ways that we can connect better with our teen students. First and foremost, when you're teaching teens, it's really important to understand the teen dynamics and what is going on in their brain that affects learning and communication. The brain, different parts of the brain develop at different times. And one of the things that's happening in our teens is that their prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature until the age of 24. That is why we might have moodiness, that they might seem impulsive, because that part of the brain is responsible for controlling things like mood, attention, impulse control, etc. It also affects their ability to plan ahead and to see potential consequences. Meanwhile, we have the amygdala, which is already getting developed in those teenage years, and that is the part that leads to strong emotions like fear and anger, fight or flight responses, etc. So it's important to know that just because a teen walks into your studio one day and is super happy and ready to learn, and the next week when they walk in, they are moody and like not at all wanting to talk, it's not your fault. There's some brain stuff going on. Now, so what can we do here? Well, it's all about building rapport, right? It is about building mutual respect and trust with our teens, between our student and ourselves, and showing trust in their capabilities as a young adult. That's what they are wanting from you. They want to be seen as that young adult who is responsible. So there are many things that we can do in order to encourage that. One of the things that we can do to really help our teen students is to keep those open communication lines, encouraging them to express their thoughts, their concerns, to talk about their interests without fear of judgment. It's so important to stay curious when we have teens in our studio and to be able to ask the right questions so that they do feel comfortable with us and that they trust us and that they will open up. When we are able to do that, when we are able to keep open lines of communications with our teens, we are going to build stronger and more stable relationships. That is going to increase teen retention in your studio. And it's going to give them this supportive environment where they feel seen, heard, valued, understood, which, let's be honest, when you were a teenager, that's all you wanted. It doesn't necessarily have to deal with the music. It's about being seen and understood. And when you can provide that for your teen students, they're going to stick around. Now, let's be clear. We are not therapists, so we don't fill that role. But what we can do is create safe spaces where teens feel good about talking to adults. All right, a couple of little techniques that you can use in order to engage with your teens is, one, be aware of their need for autonomy. They are growing in independence when they reach those teenage years, which sometimes happens as early as 11, and give them choices when it comes to their learning so that will help them improve engagement and cooperation. Give them autonomy over what they get to choose. All right, so I think that's where we're wrapping it up today. If you want to learn more about teens, please be sure to check out Wendy Stevens' workshop. It is absolutely fabulous. It is called Teaching Teens: What Researchers, Therapists, and Teens Wish You Knew. And now through March 31st, if you use the code, I'll bring this up. If you use the code Teaching Teens Sara Campbell when you check out and you get this workshop, you will get 15% off, which is pretty sweet. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to wrap it up, and we will see you all next week with more fun topics. And in the meantime, stay savvy and stay you, because you are an amazing teacher and there is no one in the world quite like you. And I think you're pretty dang awesome. Oh, and I forgot, drop the word teen down below if you want to get information about the workshop. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next time. Where's the outro music? There it is. Yay.